The Sands Hotel and Casino in Las Vegas, Nevada, March of 1975. The main event floor had been cleared of its usual arrangement and restructured to hold 2,200 seated guests. Every one of them credentialed somebody in the overlapping worlds of boxing, martial arts, film and sport. The chairs were arranged in a precise oval around a demonstration area roughly 40 feet across. Its center marked by a single strip of white tape on a polished hardwood floor. The overhead lighting was set at the kind of brightness that leaves no shadows and nowhere to hide. Outside, the Nevada desert sat at 91 degrees at 4 in the afternoon. Inside, the air conditioning ran cold enough that most guests kept their jackets on. Most of them. One man in the fourth row had removed his jacket 20 minutes before the event began. He folded it once along the center seam, set it across the back of his chair, and sat with both forearms resting on his knees. He wore a plain white shirt and dark trousers. His boots were the kind a man wore to a job site rather than an awards ceremony. He was 35 years old, 5 feet 10 inches tall, and 178 pounds in the measured and particular way of a man who has maintained the same weight for a decade by discipline rather than luck. He had a short beard, reddish brown and turning at the edges, and he wore no watch, no ring and no expression that announced itself. Nobody in rows 1 through 3 had recognized him yet. At the front of the room, at a standing microphone positioned just inside the white tape, stood a young man who was very different in almost every calculable way. He was 18 years old. He was 5 feet 11 inches tall, and 212 pounds of something that did not yet look entirely finished. Which was the terrifying part. His arms were the arms of a man who had been constructed in a weight room since the age of 14. His neck was the kind of neck that announcers describe from ringside in voices that drop half a register. He had already won 14 consecutive amateur bouts in the New York circuit, 12 of them by stoppage, 9 of those in the first round. He had been invited to this particular event as a guest of his trainer, a man with 3 decades of boxing credentials, who had told more than one person in the room that the boy beside him would be the heavyweight champion of the world before his 21st birthday. Nobody who had seen the boy move doubted it. His name had been announced when he entered. A portion of the crowd applauded with genuine recognition. He stood at the microphone without notes and without apparent nerves, and he spoke in the direct and unhesitating manner of someone who has been told all his life that he is correct. What he said next was heard by every one of those 200 people. It was heard by 3 boxing journalists, one of whom was taking handwritten notes on a legal pad. It was heard by a tournament director who had organized 31 martial arts exhibitions in the preceding decade. It was heard by a stunt coordinator who had worked on 11 major films, and who would later say that in those 11 films he had never heard a room go that quiet so quickly. What the boy said, precisely, was this. He said that he had great respect for traditional martial arts as a cultural practice. He said that he believed they served a useful purpose in terms of discipline and physical fitness, and the preservation of certain kinds of historical knowledge. He said, however, that he was a professional boxer, and that a professional boxer was a different category of human being from a martial artist. The same way a race car was a different category from a bicycle, and that in any honest and unscripted collision between those 2 categories, only one outcome was possible. He paused there for effect, and several people in the room took the pause as an invitation to respond, and several of them did. He waited for the noise to settle. Then he said that if anyone in the room disagreed with him, he was willing to demonstrate right now, on this floor, and that he would need at most 1 punch to do it. He said the words slowly and with the particular confidence of a man who believes he is being generous by explaining himself at all. He said, "1 punch is all I need." In the next 11 seconds, something happened that nobody in that room had expected, and that nobody who witnessed it would describe the same way twice, and that would travel out of that room and through the corridors of both sport and cinema for the next 4 decades. Nobody in that arena knew they were watching the beginning of a story that would still be told when both men were old. In the fourth row, the man in the white shirt stood up. If you have been with this channel for any length of time, you know what it means when he stands up. If this is the first time you have found us, stay until the end, because what that boy said from the floor in the minute that followed would redirect the course of his entire life. Make sure you are subscribed and drop a comment below telling us where in the world you are watching from. Because this is the kind of story that deserves a witness. The man in the white shirt was not always the man in the white shirt. There is a version of this story that requires you to understand what had happened in the preceding 15 years before you can understand what happened in those 11 seconds, and so that is where we begin. He had grown up in Ryan, Oklahoma, the middle child of 7, in a household that ran on structure and very little else. His father was a man who worked and left and returned and worked again. His mother was the fixed point. By the age of 13, he had discovered that his body was built in a particular way for a particular purpose that he did not yet have the vocabulary to name. He was fast in the specific and measurable way of a man whose nervous system fires ahead of his thinking. He was patient in the way of someone who has learned that most problems resolve themselves if you do not move toward them prematurely. And he had hands that when they arrived somewhere, arrived with a precision that his first instructor described as unusual in 40 years of teaching. He joined the United States Air Force at 18. He was stationed in South Korea, and it was there on a base outside of Seoul that he found the thing his body had been built for. He began studying Tong Sudo under a Korean master who was 61 years old and 138 pounds and who threw him across the floor of the training room on the first day with a single wrist displacement that he did not see and could not explain afterward. He trained 7 days a week for 3 years. He achieved his black belt on a Thursday afternoon in November with a panel of 3 examiners, 2 of whom were Korean nationals with tournament records spanning 2 decades, and he bowed to each of them in the particular silence of someone who understands that he has just been permitted to begin. He returned to the United States and began competing. He won the International Karate Championship in 1968. He won it again in 1969. He won it again in 1970, and 1971 and 1972, 5 consecutive years, which is the kind of number that requires a moment to let land. 5 consecutive years. In a field of competitors who trained for nothing else, who had structural advantages of height and reach and age. He won without a significant injury and without a decision that anyone in the room called close. He retired from competition in 1974, undefeated, and so when the young boxer in the demonstration area looked out at the room and said that one punch was all he needed, he was looking, without knowing it, at a man who had not lost a competitive match in 7 years. He was looking at a man who had spent 15 years studying not how to hit people, but how to read them. He was looking at a man who, by the particular calculus of what he was not outmatched by size or youth or the weight of a professional record. He had already lost. He just did not know it yet. The man in the white shirt stood without rushing. He placed one hand on the back of his chair and pushed it 2 inches to the left to clear the row. He walked to the end of the 4th row without touching anyone or saying anything. He walked down the center aisle toward the white tape, and he stopped 6 feet outside it, which is a specific distance if you know what you are looking at. And several people in that room knew exactly what they were looking at. The tournament director, a man named Gerald Park who had run exhibitions in 16 states, set both palms flat on the table in front of him and did not move them. The boxing journalist on the left side of the press section capped his pen. The stunt coordinator in the 7th row leaned forward and placed both elbows on his knees, the way a man leans in when something is about to require his complete attention. The crowd had begun to locate him by then. It started in the rows closest to the aisle and moved outward in the way that recognition moves through rooms, not like a wave exactly, more like a current beneath water. Something you feel before you see it. By the time he had reached the edge of the tape, the far sections had quieted. By the time he stopped at 6 feet, the room had achieved the particular silence of 2,200 people holding a decision in suspension. He did not roll his shoulders. He did not bounce on the balls of his feet. He did not crack his knuckles or adjust his stance or do any of the things that a man does when he needs the audience to register that he has arrived. He simply stood, weight distributed in the balanced and unhurried way of a man who has stood in this exact internal place several hundred times, and found nothing there to worry about. The boy at the microphone looked at him. His trainer, standing slightly to his left, looked at him. Something passed between the trainer and the boy, quickly, and the boy straightened slightly, because he had been trained his whole life to register physical information, and physical information about the man standing 6 feet from the tape was arriving in a category that his body recognized before his mind had processed it. He was, to his very significant credit, genuinely skilled. This is the part of the story that matters most to understand. He was not a fool and he was not performing. He had natural gifts that his trainer had identified at 14 and developed with extraordinary care. And those gifts were real. His jab was a legitimate weapon. Fast enough that the journalists present had timed it in other settings at under 0.2 of a second from chamber to extension. His right hand carried the kind of weight that boxing writers were already reaching for inadequate adjectives to describe. He had dropped grown men, credentialed men, men with full professional records, with the right hand. And the men who fell did not always get back up before the count. None of that was fabrication. None of that was the pride talking. The pride was the flaw, not the skill. The skill was entirely real. The pride was the thing that had brought him to the microphone in the first place, had given him the particular certainty that the room was his, and the demonstration was a formality, had told him that the distance between himself and whoever was standing on the other side of the tape was a distance that could be closed in one motion and resolved in the time it takes a jaw to register impact. A fight is not two men deciding who is stronger. A fight is a conversation about distance, and the man who controls the distance controls the conversation entirely. In boxing, the dialogue is conducted within a specific and practiced range where the jab and the cross and the hook are the vocabulary, and the feet are the grammar. Change the grammar and you change the language. Change the language and the vocabulary no longer means what it meant. The man standing 6 feet from the white tape had spent 15 years becoming fluent in a language that had a different grammar entirely, and he was about to explain that the way a man explains something to a student, not to an opponent. Second one. The boy moved first, which was expected. He was younger and his instinct was forward pressure. He closed the distance in a single controlled step and extended the jab from a textbook position, clean, direct, well practiced, the kind of jab that had worked against every opponent he had faced in 14 amateur bouts. At the point of full extension, the man in the white shirt was not where he had been. He had moved laterally a distance of approximately 16 inches in a motion that the human eye processes as stillness interrupted by a new position. The jab found air. The tournament director's right hand came off the table. Second two. The boy recovered, which was the mark of genuine training. A less skilled fighter stumbles on the miss. He reset, adjusted his read on the distance, and delivered the right hand with the full weight and timing that had ended 12 amateur bouts. The right hand is where he lived. The right hand was the sentence that the preceding 14 bouts had been building toward. He threw it with everything he had been trained to bring to it. The man in the white shirt was not there. This is the specific thing that trained observers noted afterward, and that non-practitioners struggle to process. He did not block it. He did not parry it. He did not lean away from it, or raise a guard against it. He simply was not in the location the punch was designed to reach, because he had understood from the moment the right hand was chambered where it was going to arrive and at what velocity, and he had already moved from that location before the punch departed. He was standing at a new position, 45 degrees off the boy's right shoulder, which is a position that cannot be reached from the boy's current stance in any single motion. The stunt coordinator in the 7th row exhaled through his teeth. He did not know he had done it. His assistant, seated to his right, turned and looked at him. He did not look back. The boxing journalist uncapped his pen. Second three. The boy turned. He was still functional and still thinking, which again speaks to the quality of the training, because a less prepared fighter would have frozen by this point. He turned and he read the new position and he recalibrated. And what he saw was the man in the white shirt standing at a range of 3 feet, which is inside boxing distance, which should have been an advantage. He loaded the hook, the short left hook, the close-range weapon, the one that works at this distance precisely because this is the distance it was built for. The man in the white shirt moved his right hand in a direction that took approximately 4/10 of a second and redirected the hook by 11 degrees, which is enough, which is precisely enough. And simultaneously he shifted his weight to his right foot and raised his left knee to a position directly adjacent to the boy's floating rib, not touching it, not striking it, present at a distance of 1 inch, held there with a stillness that announced its own intention without completing it. He stopped. He waited. The room did not breathe. The boy felt the knee at 1 inch from his ribs before he saw it. He felt the controlled redirect of the hook. He stood in the new geometry of what had just happened and understood something that had no word in the vocabulary he had been given. Something that landed not in his mind but in the deeper register where a body stores the information it cannot argue with. He lowered his hands. The man in the white shirt lowered his knee. He extended his right hand, open, palm up, in the gesture that means something different than a handshake, means something older and more precise. He said something. He said it quietly enough that the first 3 rows could not hear it clearly, and would spend the next 40 years comparing their versions of what he said. The boy heard it. His trainer, standing near the edge of the tape, may have heard it. The boy stood at the fork in the road that this moment placed before him. Every man who has ever been genuinely beaten stands at this same fork, and the road he chooses in the next 30 seconds tells you more about him than everything he did before the fork arrived. He reached out and took the open hand. He held it for a moment. Then he nodded once, which is not the nod of a man agreeing to terms, but the nod of a man receiving something he was not expecting and finding it more valuable than the thing he came with. He said something back. He said it quietly and without performing it for the room. The man in the white shirt listened, released his hand and walked back up the center aisle toward the 4th row. He did not look at the crowd. He picked up his jacket from the back of the chair. He folded it over his forearm. He walked toward the rear exit. At the edge of the floor, Gerald Park, the tournament director, stepped 2 paces from his table and placed one hand on the man's shoulder as he passed. He did not say anything. The contact lasted approximately 3 seconds. It was the kind of contact that verifies something, that confirms for the person making it that what they witnessed was not a trick of the light or a product of expectation. The man in the white shirt walked through the rear door and into the hallway, and the door closed behind him, and 2,200 people sat in the kind of silence that follows something that cannot immediately be placed into an existing category. Then the room began to speak. The story left the Sands Hotel that evening in the mouths of every person who had been in the room. It traveled first through the martial arts world, where the specific technical details were debated and refined and occasionally corrected, and the corrections themselves were debated and refined. It traveled into boxing circles, where it was received with varying degrees of skepticism that diminished in direct proportion to the credibility of the person telling it. It traveled into the film world, where the stunt coordinator told it on 17 separate production sets over the following 8 years, each time to a room that went quiet in the particular way rooms go quiet when a story is true. Gerald Park wrote about it in a newsletter he published for tournament organizers in the Western states. He chose his words with the care of a man who knows that the difference between a report and a legend is precision. And he was precise. He named the date. He named the venue. He named the credential of the boxer. He described the 3 exchanges in the sequential order in which they occurred. He noted that the entire encounter from the moment the man in the white shirt crossed the tape to the moment he extended his hand lasted 11 seconds as measured on his stopwatch, which he had started by instinct when the first jab was thrown. 11 seconds. 40 years of conversation. The boy became what his trainer said he would become. He became what everyone in that room believed he would become. The right hand did precisely what it had always promised to do, in stadiums and arenas around the world, against opponents who had spent their entire professional lives preparing for it, and still could not account for it when it arrived. He became the name that announcers said with a particular register of reverence, and that audiences responded to with a particular kind of electricity that very few names in the history of the sport had generated, and he carried that 11 seconds with him. He carried it the way you carry a piece of of information that reorganizes something fundamental about your understanding of what you are and what exists. He spoke about it once, publicly, in a long-form interview conducted in 1996 in the only way he knew how to speak about difficult things, which was directly and without ornamentation. He said that there were things he had learned in the gym from people who had been boxing their whole lives, and he was grateful for every one of those things. He said there were other things he had learned outside the gym that had no name in the gym's vocabulary. He said that one afternoon in Las Vegas he had stood in front of a man who showed him that the room he lived in had more walls than he had counted. He did not name the man. He did not need to. The man in the white shirt had, by 1996, made 33 films. He had trained law enforcement agencies in 6 states. He had founded a martial arts organization whose membership would eventually reach several million people across more than 160 countries. He had continued to teach in the same way he had always taught, which was by demonstrating rather than explaining, and by leaving the student with a question rather than an answer. Because a question a man carries with him is more durable than an answer someone hands him at the door. He never told the Sands Hotel story in public. He had told it twice privately, to students he considered ready for the specific lesson it contained, and both times he had told it in the same way, briefly, without drama, and then he had moved on to the next thing. Because the next thing was always more interesting to him than the past thing, which is perhaps the most accurate description of what made him exactly what he was. The private sentence he spoke over that extended open hand in the demonstration area of the Sands Hotel has never been confirmed to a single journalist or biographer who pursued it. 3 people claim to know it. 2 of those 3 agree on the first 4 words. The third says the other 2 have the last word wrong, and that the last word is the part that matters. What all 3 agree on is the effect of it. What all 3 agree on is that a young man who walked into that room carrying a certainty so complete it had never once been examined, walked out of it carrying something he had not brought with him. Something that over the next decade he would be unable to set down. Something that his trainer, who was a careful and experienced man, recognized in him the following morning and chose not to ask about directly. Because some things a trainer knows to leave alone. There is a version of a man that exists before he is taught something he cannot unlearn. And there is the version that exists after. The distance between those 2 versions is not always visible from the outside. But the man himself feels it every time he enters a room and takes the measure of it with whatever instrument he was using before, and finds that instrument has been recalibrated. What this room held, for 11 seconds in March of 1975, was the particular education that no gym provides and no record contains. It held the distance between what a man believes he can do, and what another man allows him to discover he cannot. It held the difference between a story a man tells about himself in front of 2,200 people, and the story the next 11 seconds right for him on the floor of what is actually true. The light in the Sands Hotel kept falling on those polished floorboards through the whole of it, entirely indifferent to what was happening above them. The air conditioning ran cold, the chairs sat in their precise oval, and somewhere on the boulevard outside, the Nevada evening continued its business without any awareness that something worth 40 years of retelling had just occurred inside. What a man can do and what he says he can do are measured in different rooms. The second room is always the one that counts. Next week we will talk about what happened the evening Bruce Lee visited Chuck Norris at his dojo and asked him a single question that nobody in the building expected, and that changed the way both of them understood the thing they had spent their lives building. Leave a comment below with where you are watching from. We read every one.